All right. What's up, primates? I should begin the stream by explaining why I don't have my good microphone. I do have my good microphone, actually. The problem is I left my cord at the Airbnb that I stayed at in Oregon. So even though I have my microphone, the cord for it, I got to get a new one. So I'm making do with this, and that's fine. It works out. Um, so I'm just going to get into the stream because um, I'm not going to wait till I have better equipment to do it, of course. What I'm going through right now is the experience of grief and mourning. But of course, as anyone watching this channel knows, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't believe in an afterlife um, or a God or any of that stuff, right? And I know that for a lot of people, there seems to be this idea that even among some atheists, that self-deception is necessary for closure or for comfort. And because of the fact that they think that self-deception is necessary for closure or comfort, they think that you're really being an immoral or irrational or unethical person if you try to talk somebody out of deceiving themselves. But I actually hold that one does not have to deceive themselves to find closure in the case of grief and mourning. And some deaths are easier to grieve than others. And I'm just going to come out and say it and be fully honest and forward right here. This is not a particularly difficult loss for me. This isn't a particularly difficult time of grief because I've gone through significantly more difficult times of grief. And on the surface, that might sound like an offensive or bad thing to say, but it's not. And the reason why is because the family member that I'm currently grieving is my grandmother, who died at the age of 95 years old after having accomplished every goal that I'm aware of her having. This isn't the same type of tragedy as the death of somebody in my age group, which I've also experienced. So this is an easier one to take on, and I'll admit that. But it's still grief. It's still a loss. There's still a lot that comes with it, especially when you have to accept the fact that if you're somebody like myself, and I think this is most of us who are atheists, or at least in the atheist community online, most of us don't have atheist families. Some do, but a lot of us have families who are religious, and if they're not religious, they're still spiritual. And times of grief and mourn and loss are particular instances of spirituality and prayer and things like that. And it's frustrating for us, right? Because somebody in your family is going to assert that they know that they're going to see this person again. And I used to say I don't want to be an asshole. I'm not even going to say that. I'm actually fine with it. I'll be an asshole. You're not going to see them again. They're dead, and that's how death works. And I want to talk about how unhealthy I think it is for somebody to lie to themselves about a life not really ending. Okay? If you are in a relationship and your relationship ends, I don't care if you find comfort in telling yourself that your relationship still exists in some way that none of us can observe. It's not healthy for you to think that your relationship has continued if it's not. And I think that the same thing applies to life. I think relationships and lives are two things that we grieve. We grieve them differently, of course. I've been grieving a relationship a lot recently. I was in a relationship for a year, and I'm still in a state of grief over that relationship. And that's a different kind of thing. But grieving, it would not be healthy for me to think I was still in that relationship since I'm not. And that's kind of the point, is I think people need to come to terms with reality. The same way, not that I'm a fan of the AA 12-step sobriety thing, but the first step in the 12-step program is if you're an addict, you have to admit that you're an addict. Because how are you going to go solving a problem that you have and admit that you have? And I agree with them on that. So when it comes to closure, I feel the same way. How are you ever going to get closure if you haven't even accepted the fact that this person is gone? It's bad for you. I think it's counterproductive to closure. So something that I would like to say is this. When you're in an instance like my grandmother was in, where for at least the past 2 years of her life, there has been a tremendous amount of suffering, the time of that person's death is a time in which they're at peace. And by being at peace, I mean that person is no longer suffering anymore. And I think that that's something to take joy in. You're not taking joy in the fact that that person doesn't exist anymore. You're finding joy in the fact that that person is not experiencing suffering or hardship anymore. And that's where I'm at with this. I should mention what I experienced though when I was there. A dilemma that a lot of atheists have been asked and argued about if they were there. Would you lie to somebody on their deathbed? Because there was an hour in which I was left alone with my grandma, and she started, at one point, she started hallucinating and thought that her father was there. But prior to hallucinating and thinking her dad was in the room, she asked me why he wasn't there. She was very, my grandma has always been very obsessed with death, and one of her biggest fears has been dying alone. So recognizing that she was on her deathbed, if for like 1 or 2 minutes only one person was in the room with her because someone had to get something, she was in a lot of fear, and that makes sense. So she asked me, "Why isn't my father here?" And that was tough because I don't want to say I don't believe in lying to somebody on their deathbed. A lot of you think it's okay. I don't. I don't think the fact that this person's dying makes it somehow okay to lie to them. So I didn't lie, but of course I also didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't respond by saying he's not here because he's dead. You're not going to do that. So what I do is I start combing my thoughts for any true thing I could say which works as a response to this. And what I was able to find was your father loved you. And that's it. Fortunately, I guess for me and my dilemma, it was shortly after I had said that she was hallucinating and thought she was seeing him. So I didn't need to say anything. She saw him with her own eyes, and then I don't have to do anything, right? And I'm not going to tell her she's hallucinating or anything like that, right? No point. But I don't have to lie to her. I didn't need to. But this is where I was at. And this was difficult. I wasn't actually in California while she passed. I left California the day before. What had happened was I went to Long Beach for, I think it was 4 days. I planned on going to Long Beach. And it happened to be the case that when I was going to be there was around the time my grandma was passing. So I delayed my trip. I bought another ticket, and I stayed for another day so that I could see her. And I'm really glad that I did that because when I went to my hometown, it wasn't only going and seeing my grandma. And while it was difficult, I'm very glad that I went and I saw her. But minutes after seeing my grandma on her deathbed, I got to meet in person for the first time my niece. And this is a niece who is so like I have a friend named Andy who his entire family, his brothers, Bailey and Jaden, his parents, his uncles and aunts, and like they've always been like family to me. So I've been like in that family, right? In fact, more so than almost than in the family with my last name. But I I got to because I have a biological nephew who's 4 years old, but I haven't got to meet him in person. I got to meet him on video chat, but I didn't get to meet. And that was when he was already like 4 years old, but I didn't get to meet him in person. And I got to meet my niece in person and hold my niece and to hold new life. And also saw a little girl walking with it was like a gift bag, but for her it was huge because she's a toddler. So she's walking with it and she's carrying it like above her head and she looks adorable. And I'm kind of at this recognition that that was my grandma at some point. That was her, this newborn that I'm holding, right? And I'm seeing firsthand immediately right now the cycle of life, or the circle of life in its entirety. And you know what? It's a beautiful thing. It's a difficult thing, but it's a beautiful thing. And we have to take it all as it is. One of the reasons people have to die is this. This is our this is the harsh truth, right? And you don't believe in some omnibenevolent creator, you can come to terms with this. If people didn't die, there wouldn't be more room on earth being made for new people to be born, right? If the maximum amount of people that the earth could, sustain, if they had at some point just had to, if they were, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for, immortal, but weren't able to reproduce, because if they were immortal and reproducing, it would overpopulate the earth way too much. But if they were immortal and not reproducing, none of us would have been born, because those people existed a long ass time ago. So we all get to be born because those people died. And other people are going to get to be born because we're going to die. And I don't know what could help you cope with a loss of an old family member more than holding a baby immediately after the fact. But I'm not in a particular state of and I may very well cry. A lot of the time my emotional responses to death or anything like that, it comes a few days afterward, so like even if like today my mom died, I probably wouldn't cry today, but then I'd break down in a week and not be able to do anything for months. But there's probably a delay. So right now I can't even say for sure if I know how well it is that I'm handling it, because I could handle it a lot worse later. But I'm at terms with things now. I'm looking at the circle of life in its entirety and putting things out there, and just kind of reminding people that I know that it seems like you have to believe in this idea that a person still exists to find closure. I think it's counterproductive, for the same reason it's counterproductive to still believe a relationship exists if it doesn't. You're not going to get closure if you don't accept the fact that the end has come. And as far as my grandma's life goes, the end has come. She got to live a long and happy life, which isn't something that everybody can say. And you have to find your reasons to come to terms with things. It's going to differ for all of us in every different death. There are deaths I still haven't really come to terms with. I won't deny that. But this is where I'm at now. The stream is definitely, as you can see, there's no reason for a script or anything like that. For whatever reason, I'm not even using StreamYard. I just went on YouTube. But it's a personal kind of thing. I mean, I'm an open book. I'm opening up about it, but there's no intention for this to be particularly professional and all that. So it's all good. I think I've got, for the most part, my thoughts out there. They're into the ether, I guess. Other people who are atheists experiencing or have experienced grief, I hope that something that I've said could be helpful to you. I'm not insisting everybody come to terms with things the same way that I do and look at things the same way that I do. I'm offering my perspective and giving the words on where I'm at. But, I'm appreciative of the fact that my grandma was able to accomplish her own goals. And it was difficult seeing her on her deathbed, because she differs from me in death preference. If I had cancer and was going to die, I would like to go to a state with a Death with Dignity Act, and I would like to end my life on my own terms. But you also have to remember that for some people, death with dignity means taking every last dying breath while they allow their body to shut down. And that's her preference. And because of the fact that that's her preference, I'm glad that she got to go out that way. I will say, though, that if you are considering which route you're going to take, you do become a burden on others, especially when it becomes the case that you don't understand people who are helping you, are not trying to hurt you, and you lash out at them. I don't want to be on my deathbed lashing out at people who are only trying to help me because I don't understand that they're not hurting me. And that's what happens when you delay your death that long, very often. So for me, death with dignity is not that. is the opposite of what it is for my grandma. Okay. And I'll be blunt with you. There was a moment where my sister and I had moved her foot back on the bed because her foot was laying off the bed, and was like, this isn't good for her circulation. It's gonna hurt her. Let's move her foot. And it took us 20 minutes to be able to even do it. And she was afraid of us and just hated us for an hour. And within the hour that I was with her, she looked at me and she asked me, do I hurt you? And I told her, no. And she said, crying, then why do you hurt me? And she wasn't able to grasp at that moment that I wasn't trying to hurt her, that I was helping her because I can't even describe the way her foot was off the bed and was for sure going to lose circulation and be more uncomfortable. If you could see it, you would have done the same, I'm sure. But that's very difficult, right? And so I'm glad that she went with her option. I'm glad that she got to have her preference and do what dignified her death. But I'm also going to admit that it's taking a toll on me because I had to experience that. And that's also okay for me to admit that she chose to die in such a way that it put an emotional burden on other people. That's okay to admit. It's okay that she did it. We accept it. We love her. But it's also worth considering. Learn your lesson from watching other people die. How do you want to die when it happens? I don't want to go out that way. But if you do, I think you should have that right. And with that said, I'm willing to end this stream. I'm thankful to those of you who've tuned in, or those of you who end up watching this later. Like I said, it's just my perspective. So I'm just dealing with this death. It's okay. People die. Life ends. And when people die, you don't see them again. Come to terms with it. Is that hard to hear? Is it hard to hear that people die and that you are not going to see them again? If so, hear me out. People die, and when they do, you do not see them again. I don't care if it's hard for you to hear. It doesn't have anything to do with it. That's hard to hear. It's important to recognize. It's healthy to recognize. I'm no longer in my relationship, and that helps me get closure. My grandma is no longer alive, and I recognize it, and that helps me get closure. If I can't recognize these things, I'm not going to accept them. You have to accept the truth to cope with it. And with that, I thank you all for tuning in. It's been a good venting session. Thank you. That's not even an end button. That's embarrassing.